Hello and welcome to another episode with Prayer and Petition. It's absolutely great to have you with us again today, and we're going to continue on our second part now of this series all about sin. So if you've not checked out our first episode already, have a look up above. I've got one of the cards there that will take you over to our first episode entitled What is Sin? And if you've not seen that yet, I really encourage you to go and have a look at that now. Maybe just pause this podcast, pause this video, go have a look at that, because what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be building on that idea of sin, particularly that idea that sin is us stepping away from God. So we're really going to start to build on that. So like I said, if you're not having a look, go check that out, come back here and let's have a look. Today we're going to be talking about, now that we know what sin is, or we've got a bit of an idea of what sin is, now we're going to be starting to look at, okay, well, if we know what sin is, why does it exist in the world? If God is all powerful, if he's all loving, why is it that he's allowed us to have this sin in the world? So let's make a start. And the first thing I want to say on this is that God is morally just. Yeah, he's a righteous God. Always has been, always will be. We can see that throughout a load of different verses in the Bible. But it's really important in this idea of getting started talking about why there is sin in the world. Because if we go all the way back to the first sin, the original sin by Adam in the Garden of Eden, then as we know, there was the tree, and God said, do not eat from this tree. This is the tree that gives knowledge of good and evil. Don't eat from it. You don't want to know about that. You don't want to deal with that. And Adam decided different, and he decided, well, actually, I do want to know about that, and he ate from the tree. Now, it's quite funny, because when I was younger, I used to think that this apple that Adam ate was like some magical apple, and it gave him this power to know the difference between good and evil. So only as I've got a little bit older that I've realised that that isn't the case. God could have said, don't eat from this tree, don't eat from this other tree, don't eat from this bush, and don't eat this, whatever. It was it's the principle of the matter. It's the fact that Adam ate from what God told him not to eat from, or essentially he disobeyed God. He chose to go his own way. Yeah, what we were talking about, the definition of sin. But what's important here is, because God is morally just, because he's righteous, he had these two options. God could either effectively sweep this inconvenience under the rug, either by recreating Adam and Eve, or by ignoring what Adam and Eve had done, or alternatively to that, he could effectively choose to respect that decision, which is what he did do, which is what was morally just, which is what was righteous to do. God said, don't do this, or there'll be these consequences. We went and did that we were told not to do, and the decision is what stood. We made that choice. So essentially, God created us with the capacity to choose or reject sin. Yeah. But what's really important when we're starting to look at this of why is sin in the world, if God created us with the capacity to sin, he also created us with the capacity to reject that sin. And that's actually what we're called to do. In Genesis 4, verse 7, reading from NLT, you will be accepted if you do what is right. But if you refuse to do what is right, then watch out. Sin is crouching at the door, eager to control you, but you must subdue it and be its master. We must be the masters of sin. We have that capacity within us. Yeah. And we know that. Yeah, we know that day to day. We can see that today. And, if you read Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis, it's an absolutely fantastic book. And in it, C.S. Lewis talks a lot about our moral law. Yeah, the law of human nature, that little voice in our head that we hear, which is saying, no, don't do that. No, do that. That's right. That's wrong. And that is, ultimately our conscience. Yeah. That's what gives us this idea of what is right and what is wrong, what is to sin and what is to not sin. And particularly if you are a Christian, then you'll know that that is kind of that voice put there by God, telling you what is right and what is wrong, what is a deviation from God's law, and what is upholding it. And we can see that. Yeah, we can see that in Scripture. If we have a look at James chapter 1, verse 13, 14, I will warn you, we are kind of jumping around loads of the Bible today. But James 1, 13 and 14, and remember, when you are being tempted, do not say, God is tempting me, because God is never tempted to do wrong. He never tempts anyone else. Temptation comes from our own desires, which entice us and drag us away. Now, this is important because it kind of shows the point that we're talking about our ability to rule over sin, but it also goes a little bit further than that and starts to bring us into this idea that the desire to feel good isn't one which is inherently evil. Yeah, we have a desire to do good and to feel good, and there's nothing wrong with that. When this idea of sin really starts to come in is when we start to fulfill that need to feel good with things that we know are wrong, right? Big example, sobriety, yeah, or lack thereof. When we do things like smoking, drinking to excess, illicit substances, we're trying to fulfill that need to feel good with things that we know are not good. Yeah, does that make sense? We're trying to fulfill that need to feel good with things that aren't good. And what is the outcome of that? Yeah, what is the outcome of fulfilling that thing, fulfilling that need to feel good with things that aren't good? Well, people get hurt. Yeah, we get hurt. If you think about the idea of sobriety, when we do things like we do drink to excess, what are the outcomes of that? Yeah, the physical ailments, the emotional ailments that come from that, from when we do it continuously, when we try and fulfill that need to feel good. I'm sure you can think of other examples of this when we try to, materialism, when we try to buy everything that we can to try and feel good. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with wanting to feel good, but what does start to go wrong is when we choose to go about it in the wrong way. And we know. Sometimes it can be difficult. Yeah, it can be difficult to listen to that conscience, that little voice in your head, especially if it's something you've not done for a while. Yeah, I think we've all been through times where, and even today, where we get tempted, like it says in James. Temptation comes from our own desires, which entice us and drag us away. And it's really important that we listen to that voice in our head that says, well, you know what? I can't really afford to buy that thing this month. I kind of need to wait because it's the right thing to do. If I buy it now, or I could get it on credit, and then I've got to pay it off, and then when we start to do these things to excess, when we start to get dragged away, yeah, that's when things start to become a problem. I just want to talk about a couple of verses here, just to try and tie things off. Two verses from Deuteronomy here. Looking at Deuteronomy 10, verse 12 to 13. And now, Israel, what does the Lord your God require of you? He requires only that you fear the Lord your God and live in a way that pleases him, and love him and serve him with all your heart and soul. And you must always obey the Lord's commands and decrees that I am giving you today for your own good. Let's have a quick look at another verse. Deuteronomy 6, verse 24. And the Lord our God commanded us to obey all these decrees and to fear him, so he can continue to bless us and preserve our lives. And he has done to this day, as he has done to this day. Now, one thing I just want to mention is in both these verses we hear the word fear. Yeah, fear of the Lord. What can be quite helpful is to think of this in terms of reverence for the Lord. Just kind of helps to fill that image. But the important thing here is we're talking about, if we follow these laws, if we follow these decrees, and we show reverence to the Lord, he will bless us and preserve our lives as he has done to this day. And we see that, we see that in today's world. When we follow, when we act responsibly, when we are just, when we are morally right, when we make the morally right decisions, we find that our relationships prosper. Yeah? When we love our neighbour as ourselves, we find that those relationships start to prosper, they start to blossom, start to bloom. We create genuine relationships with people. So, wrapping up on this question, why does God allow sin in this world? Well, for a start, when we committed that original sin, it had to be abided by the decisions that we made as a people. And even today, that hasn't changed. When we step away from God, that is our decision. God is righteous, He is just. He respects the decisions that we make. Even if He doesn't agree with them, we have chosen to make that decision. But we know what is right. He has given us that conscience to know what is right and what is wrong. And importantly, He's given us that way back. As we looked at last week in Luke 24 verse 42, when we talk about the anguish of Christ when He went through that suffering so that we could be forgiven. Yeah, He's given us that way back. So, I'd like to thank you very much for joining us. Wow, we are covering some major ground, absolutely huge ground, and it's an absolute pleasure and privilege to try and bring some of this stuff to you. I do just want to say I am by no means an expert in any of this stuff at all. These are simply just my thoughts, my feelings, my takeaway from these verses, and I would absolutely love to have you join that conversation with me. If you can go over to byprayerandpetition.uk, you can join the conversation there, or if you're watching on YouTube, you're more than welcome to post in the comments below, and I'd absolutely love to hear some of your thoughts on this. But failing that, I really look forward to seeing from you, from hearing from you in the coming weeks, especially as we move into the second half of our series about what is sin. So I'd like to thank you very much for joining me, and I'll see you next week. God bless.